Fabian Huber is a German bodybuilding coach and former competitive bodybuilder with over a decade of experience in the sport. He specializes in guiding athletes from the off-season all the way to the bodybuilding stage with a strong emphasis on evidence-based training, nutrition, physiology and long-term health.
I like to do a little oral bump one day out and maybe even show day, but that's more for acute peaking purposes and not just for having in mind to keep the hormone levels more stable or something like that. Never I have seen so much bullshit. 2 weeks of aldactone, 200 mg of aldactone per day. In peak week I've seen stuff with diazide and torozamide in exchange. One day this, one day this. If we have a generally good off-season stack, I would keep the test and EQ baseline actually the same, and also the anastrozole, because otherwise we jump around back and forth with the E2 management.
Today we're going to talk about the contest prep, because like last time we recorded a pretty good podcast. Like people was like really happy that we've done this one. So I thought that the second part is just a must, not something that people need, but that's something that the universe just needs to yeah. So I'm gonna, because I recently like changed the formula of my podcast just to be a little bit clearer, and right now I can basically share everything that I've done over my last couple of years, just because I don't think that anything gonna take anything out of this. I hope so, because that was just suited just for me. That works great, but maybe you're gonna have a different idea about everything that we're going to do. Yeah. So I'm going to show you my physique, and we're going to pretend that I am a new client of yours and you're going to prepare me for the show. So I'm going to show you my physique at the end of the bulking. Like I was bulking for quite a long time. That was my like peak weight ever. I'm just going to show you the physique, and I'm going to show you my laps at that time. And also what I've done, like my diet, my like training, I'm going to explain, and everything. Just you're going to tell me what you need. But wait a second. Oh no, I have it here. Okay, that's great, because I've left my phone on a different room, but I have here all the notes. So I'm going to show you my screen right now. So. Hugely sorry for the interruption, guys, but thanks to your comments, subscriptions, and thumbs up, I'm even able to create a podcast like you're watching right now. So if you can, please leave the subscription, comment, and simply a thumbs up. If you wanted to further support me, please use my code. And without further ado, let's get back to the podcast. This is how I'm looking right now, let's say. So that's the front shot.
Yes. All right.
If you're ready, just tell me. I'm going to change the photos for you.
Yeah. You can just go through every few seconds, yeah. But like looks good and round, yeah.
That's it. No more photos.
Looks very solid. All right. So what was weight and height here?
The weight was. Can you see the notes? No, I don't believe. Yeah.
No.
Okay, just the photos. Okay, I just have to be sure. So the weight was 216.4 pounds, which was around 125 kilos, and I am 5'7". That's mean I'm 170 centimeters.
Okay. All right. That's very solid. All right. And so yeah, I mean, do you want my first impression?
Yeah, of course. I'm your client, so just tell me what you need to hear from me,
So first,
and how we're gonna assess that.
yeah, so I mean, first of all, of course, contest prep is not the right point in time in terms of tackling weaknesses. I still think contest prep should focus training wise, still of course heavily on weaknesses and deprioritize strong muscle groups. But of course, there is a certain expectation that is lower in terms of progression throughout prep compared to off season. I mean, first thing, I mean, very good line. I think that's a perfect off season body fat percentage, peak off-season body fat percentage to go into prep. I think more than that wouldn't have been necessary. Less than that is also not necessary. So super solid body fat wise. Quads are definitely strong. I mean, for me, if we look at it, I mean, can you go to the front lat spread? Yeah. So, I mean, it looks like, so arms are definitely, I mean, looks throughout all the poses, arms are overpowering shoulders and delts a bit, but I always think especially chest is something that gets better throughout prep also with less body fat and more separations. I mean, there is something I always look at when I judge weaknesses and strengths peak off season. I think what needs most differentiation is quads, back, and chest, because those muscle groups always thrive when they get leaner. More separation in the quads, especially talking about reactive femoral separation, will make them visually bigger. Of course, a deeper back. I mean, off-season backs never look as massive as they can, but I mean, in terms of off-season body fat percentage, if we look at the back double, for example, I mean, we can still very proper depth and width. So I think it's just a super solid starting point. And I mean, I would say, I mean, it would be too much to say chest and shoulders are weak. I would just say they are a bit overpowered by the arms in those poses. Pending final results, pending contest leanness, but overall, body fat percentage solid, no significant weaknesses, posing looks solid. So it's a great starting point from that perspective.
Great. So, what do you want to hear from me right now? Like, basically, what would you like need from me to start with a new athlete?
So, first question from my side. So, what was your last contest prep weight, and when was that contest?
I believe at that point it was like a year before, and I was around 220, something like that, because I was like less than 102 kilos for sure on stage. So that was like 220, something like that. 101,
Okay,
100 and
understood.
like half,
And
something like that.
what was the previous peak off-season weight before that prep? Just roughly.
Probably like at least 20 pounds less than
Okay,
this one.
all right. So, I mean, we are talking about that we can have a realistic expectation of having at least, let's say, 15 pounds of weight added on stage. I mean, that looks super solid. So, for me, next question is, I mean, it's the current blood work. I mean, there is also some questions that would kill the length of this podcast. Of course, I mean, the development of health parameters throughout the last years is also something that is relevant. I mean, that would be too much for now, but first thing before going into prep, I mean, I'm not someone to ramp up PEDs with beginning of prep, but that's something for in a few minutes. I would like to see the labs first before we talk about everything else, because, I mean, if labs don't look good, I wouldn't go into prep. And I don't mean that labs look like a natty athlete, but rather that it's in terms of PED usage moderate. So what I'm seeing first here, I mean, if we look at the general hematology, I always say that in this part of blood work, the only thing I'm looking for, or the main thing I'm looking for, is hematocrit and hemoglobin, just because those are the most relevant. I mean, just to be somewhat negative. For all the other parameters that we see here, I will all throw them in a bucket and say, okay, if there is no significant illness, no significant pathology, no acute immune system activity, I wouldn't expect any deviations. And that's also what we see here. I mean, hematocrit 46 is perfect. I mean, for someone your weight and also your size, muscle-wise, that's brilliant. So if it looks like that, peak off season, that was also, so the pictures are also, you're still on blast, you didn't do a cruise phase or something like that, you're still all in, right?
Never,
Okay.
never.
All right, perfect. Then let's go to the next one, because that's nothing significant. Okay, then we have, I just need to look at the table down there for the cholesterol, because it's another unit of measurement compared to Germany. So, but if we look at that, just give me a second, please. I just want to do the calculation. So one here we have it. Okay. We have 3.7, 143. Okay, so LDL cholesterol is definitely a concern for me because in the end, I mean, HDL is also on the lower end, on the pretty low end, but I mean, that's something we have to expect with PED usage, with usage of DHT derivatives. So I mean, for the HDL, of course, it's not great, but it's not something I'm acutely worried. But if we talk about LDL cholesterol, I would definitely like to see it lower. So, I mean, usually the usual parameter for Germany is milligrams per deciliter, and that's 143. So, I mean, it's something where I will just give a percentage just to give you, to tell you where I would strive for. I would say 20 to 30% reduction in LDL, rather 30 plus percent is something I would very much like to see, because in the end, I mean, for everyone, even if it's Polish and there are also some English speakers here, but I mean, you see the table down there, and the table below the LDL is usually the target values depending on your cardiovascular risk profile. And in the end, I mean, first question is always, do you have a family history of any heart issues, of any cholesterol issues, and so on? If yes, then you are in a higher risk bucket. With steroids per se, you are in a higher risk bucket, and that's why I would strive for the cholesterol values to be, in my units of measurement, below 100, and in that unit it's 143. So I would say roughly 30% reduction here is needed. I mean, I saw great results with SLUPP, also quite moderate dosages, 500 milligrams to 500 micrograms to 2 milligrams. Did you use that, or did you use any medication for cholesterol management?
No, unless we're gonna assume that like insulin is, because it's kind of just because the LDL is mostly like raised because of the like not having like good sugar in control. So that's probably it. But my LDL might be also screwed through the. I have like a period when I have like a severe problems with PEEP after pinning. So like
Mm-hmm.
it was a time when I was like almost 2 months. I have like almost constant like inflammation in my body somewhere because of the pinnings, and that was.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that was a gear or anything like that. Because I do believe that after a while I can like from what I've recalled, like after a long time of being on a surplus, my body just starts to like being super sensitive for that. So probably is like histamine response and all of the like the factors being like in place, and that was it probably like because the overload of the
Yeah.
probably like central nervous system and how to say it in English, I don't know, like the
No, no.
inflammatory markers just
Yeah.
that just raising up, yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely reasonable to say, okay, all right, peak off-season inflammation in general, plus the additional inflammation that you're describing here. I mean, it's an LDL value that I don't like, that I want to see improved. I mean, it's not a value where I would say, okay, with this LDL, you shouldn't go into prep or something like that. It's just something I wouldn't like to see it in these heights in the long run. Just,
Like
I
a
mean, if we see it a temporary risen, no issue at all for me. But you know what I'm doing from the start is identifying parameters that we have to monitor regularly, so that don't have to send you for a 600 euro blood work every 3 months or something like that, but just check which parameters are on my list to monitor a bit closely, and that would be definitely one of them. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, great. I just want to explain that
Yeah. Yeah.
normally it would be like below 3, because
Okay.
I do like my coach at the time do monitor my blood works very closely. I'm not gonna say who was, because probably some people may know, and I don't know if he wanted to mention me, but with him I was like very safe with that, because he was paying attention to that. So this is why I pulled the laps, because he just wanted to see if anything's just off at the time. So that's why.
Yeah. Perfect. But then let's jump to the next one. That's electrolytes, the fat ones, I assume, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
liver
that's
enzymes, yeah.
electrolytes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Liver enzymes slightly elevated. I mean, no worries at all. Any orals in play during that time, or is it just, I mean, we'll see that
No,
anyway.
just the training. It would
Okay, yeah.
probably needs to be at least like 72 hours to the drops, and that was like maybe like less than 48 hours. So for me, it was just a normal.
Okay, but I mean, generally, I'm not bored. Would be just interesting if there, I mean, if there was any low dosage oral into play, then I would worry even less. But bilirubin looks good, and GGT also looks good. I mean, GGT 35, that would be my control value, so not worried at all. Electrolytes overall look good. I tend to prefer just also, I mean, no hard theoretical evidence, just practical evidence. I tend to prefer seeing sodium and magnesium on the upper end of the reference. So perhaps I would increase sodium or table salt, let's say, by 1 or 2 grams a day. Perhaps I would go for 300 milligrams of elementary magnesium per day on top. But that's not something that's health critical. I mean, that would be slight optimization. Thyroid looks great overall. I mean, I assume there's GH in play, right?
Yeah, then I use GH and 150 micrograms of T4, 30
Yeah.
micrograms of T3.
Yeah, and I mean, we can see. I mean, it's what I usually expect with, or what I usually see with GH is just this. I would say a strong conversion from T4 to T3, because what we see is low T4, but more than sufficient. I mean, upper end of reference T3, and that's also something where I see a lot of people just optimizing blood work in terms of saying, okay, T4 is lower end of the reference, I need to put in more. And that's, in my opinion, that's a big mistake. I mean, I also see quite a lot of guys that don't need T4 with GH because their blood work looks exactly like this, more or less, without T4. And it's just to ensure that if in the end, the outcome has to be proper. The T3 outcome has to be proper. The TSH signaling seems to work without any problems. And what many people overlook is if you increase T4 too much, you will just increase reverse T3, and you will in the end have less thyroid hormone available. And so for me, that's perfectly fine. For estradiol, I mean, we will talk about the cycle in a minute, but from your anecdotal experience, are you someone that has to stay within the reference range to have no sides?
Yes, but the size was like mostly like my nipple sensitivity, and I get rid of my glands like a couple years ago, so that wasn't a problem anymore. But I do like aromatize very high, so even on a pretty like moderate amount of tests alone, I would aromatize as crazy. So I've always need to be on something like Boldenon or anything that's like not aromatized as much, and on additional to that, I would need to use a small dose of some AIs just because to. Otherwise, it's gonna be like crazy, and I mean
Yeah.
crazy in ultra sensitivity test, not like a just like
Yeah.
you
I
know
mean,
what I mean.
I'm perfectly fine with the 34. Let's put it like that. I would have no issue seeing you rather. I mean, if we are notably super physiological, what we are PED wise, I would have no issue seeing you in the 50 to 60 area, something like that. But I wouldn't experiment with that right now. So if there is a solid stack regarding aromatase management, then I'm fine. I mean, Vitamin D with a 53 is absolutely fine for me. So I would say target range for me is usually 50 to 80, perhaps also 50 to 90. I mean, one could make an argument to increase the daily intake by roughly 5,000 units to bring it more into the 70, 80 zone. But if that's notably beneficial or not could be discussed. So in the baseline, I would be
Yeah,
happy with that.
I was on 12
Yeah.
hundred,
I mean,
and
that's the
like
perfect
I don't
example.
know 1,200. Do I say it right? No, like
So,
12,000. Yeah,
yeah.
12,000. Like I use just because. for me, it was always a problem to keep it above 50. So I need to use just because the amount of androgens, of course. Yeah.
I was just going to say so. In the end, there is. I mean, I don't know the Polish recommendation, but in Germany it's terrible. So the German recommendation is 1,000 units a day,
2000.
and
Yeah.
and so what I see is that 95% of athletes need at least 5,000 per day to get into a proper range. But so then that's also managed. So all is good here also. And I mean, just last point, prolactin did also look fine. So no further questions. The next point, I would like to look at the stack before we get into training and nutrition.
Okay, so my stack at the time was like 1,200 tests, 875 milligrams of boldenone, 350 NPP, like I said, 150 T4, 30 T3, 10 IUs of GH, and 0.5 mg of anastrozole every day.
Wow, you still needed 0.5 anastrozole
Yeah,
with that boldenone. Well, that's really a solid aromatase.
yeah.
But no, that's from the test to boldenone ratio, it's something I would expect to say it's roughly 50% more test than boldenone to be in a proper range. But that's for the average aromatase issues. I mean, obviously you're fighting a bit more, but I mean that's perfectly fine for me. I mean, boldenone has been put in a negative context, at least here in Germany, a lot of times, and I have also been one of those proponents to say at least be careful with it, because there is certain athletes who have a very bad reaction in terms of blood pressure, in terms of hematocrit, and I mean also with boldenone, just like with trenbolone, just have a proper look at your kidney functions. So what I usually also implement is a regular urine sample from all athletes, just to look at ACR and all stuff like that. And I mean, if kidney signaling or the kidney results come back fine, if hematocrit looks something like yours, I mean there is also people with on 900 mg of boldenone who would run around at hematocrit of 53 to 53 to 56 or something like that, and then you can make the argument, okay, all right, go with or just manage the aromatase on another pathway. But if it's received well and if the body's handling it well, I mean, I would be completely fine with it. And so the only injects for the test and the boldenone, did I get that right?
And NPP, like a small dose of nandrolone.
Okay, so what's smaller, 200, 300 per week, or what is it?
350.
Okay, all right. I mean, then we are around 2.3 grams total. Honestly speaking, I think, and that's why it's so important to talk about that, I think there's quite a lot of people in our industry and in the amateur realm who would see this physique and assume it has to be a lot more. I mean, it's sad to say that, because once, I mean, I assume you also had insights from many pros, and the reality is that it isn't that high. And also, the question, and that's why I handle it like I would handle my approaches usually, it's not that I'm asking about blood work and PEDs first, because blood work is most important. PEDs isn't more important than nutrition and training. It's just that I want to see your approach, because I had many people going away because they were coming with 3 to 4 grams and more or less already indicating me in our first exchange, okay, all right, I have to double down on that to make progress. And usually with these people, if gear gets into their head and more gear gets into their head, you can't take them away from it. And then I always try to do this evaluation first, just to see, do we match? Do we have a proper, I mean, it's not about being a heavyweight, super heavyweight bodybuilder on TRT plus or something like that. Of course not. No one is talking about that. But there is a difference between reasonable use and complete irresponsible abuse. And I just don't want it to be a part of that, because in the end, it's also something I usually don't take. I don't take on enhanced athletes with cardiac preconditions, just because I don't want to bear the risk. Of course, in the end, the athlete decides what he wants to do, and if I say no, the athlete will do it with someone else. But then that's fine for me, even if it's a great athlete. I don't want to have that on my scoreboard to say, okay, I contributed to that, or I allowed it to happen, even if I'm not the one who is guilty, so to say. That's why this part came first. So next for me, I mean, Nutrition-wise, also just for everyone hearing it, just to know where I'm coming from, I'm rather liberal on the nutrition side, especially because most athletes have their routines. So what I always say is, if you have a nutrition plan that's working for you, let's have a look together at it. And if the general structure and the general choice of foods is fine for me, let's not throw it overboard. For training, I usually like to think from zero, even if it's at the start of a prep. But for nutrition-wise, it's also about established structure. So do you have it at hand to share?
Yeah, I have, but only the macros, and this is the
Okay.
macros counted from just the direct sources. So, like, for example, the training days was 300 grams of protein, 700 grams of carbs, and 35 grams of fats. But that was only from the direct sources. So it's probably going to be around 400 grams of protein, 700 grams of carbs, and around 60 to 70 grams of fats total. And that was like a medium days. And on my push days, I have like a high day with a little bit of Lantus, like 60 use of Lantus in the morning. And that was 300 protein, 920 grams of carbs, and 10 grams of fats, like additional fats. And then the rest days, which was like 2 times a week, was 300 grams of protein, 220 carbs, and 85 grams of fats.
Okay. All right. Understood. So, I mean, for me, first thing I would do is I would switch the tracking so that I have all the macros, not just from direct sources. I mean, it's a question of philosophy. Both will work. For me, it's just, for example, if you're an oat lover and throughout the course of the day you are eating 300 grams of oats, then there is also a notable protein reduction in there when I reduce it, and also certain fat reduction compared to, for example, reducing rice. So I just like to count all macros from all sources, but that's just a term of approach. And I mean, otherwise, I mean, if you had sent me, for example, also if you had told me, okay, I'm doing flexible tracking, for example, also not every day is the same, these are my macros, then I would just go with the first reduction, so to say, and then just tell you, okay, that's your prep start macros. Please send me 1-2 reference days, just so that I get an idea of your usual food choices and your usually daily structure, and then to make a decision from there on. Do I have anything, maybe just slight things to improve, to add, to remove, and that would be all. Otherwise, I would leave you on your routine. That also, I mean, before we talk about training, I mean, the biggest part of prep planning for me initially is the calorie reduction. So, what's our time frame? Are you coming 16 weeks out, 20 weeks out, 24 weeks out? What's the time frame?
Let's test how many weeks you wanted me to be like for perfect prep, because let's assume that that's going to be a perfect setup for you, because I just don't want to like throw too much of like problems at this, because that should be something that's like ideal scenario, because we both know that those ideal scenarios are never like almost never possible. But if I was your client for over like 2 years, for example, you can create the perfect scenario for me. So let's try to like pretend that we have however weeks you wanted me to be. Even if you wanted me to like, I don't know, start like first couple of weeks being on a cruise or something, we have time for that. So
Okay,
how many
all right.
weeks you like to
So
have?
in a perfect world, I would like 18 to 20 weeks of prep. How long have you been on cycle at that point here?
I think like 8 years, something like that.
Straight out. So I mean, also, but with cruise phases in between, but or full on throughout the whole time.
That was it was couples cruise, but that was like a lower on PED's side, but never like that was never intended. So for example, I one time I have like in my journey, not with that coach, but overall, I have a slightly problem with my like cardiac inputs. So my how to say it in English, like my ejection fractions dropped a lot. So I need to like just lower the PEDs for I don't remember, like 6 weeks, and I was on maybe like 300 mg of test, and that was it. And then when I started to work with Dominic Mutasio, he gave me like 8 week of almost like PCT, something like that was kind of so. And that's it. Like for at least 8 years, I was straight on. And the first couple of years was crazy high because my first coach, I was like 80 kilos and I was on like almost 3.5 grams of gear, something like that, like 8 IUs of GH and everything else thrown in.
And that's why I think it's so important to talk about these topics openly. So it's also something that is also always also here in Germany. It's also discussed. For example, I started very heavy on training, also content wise, and I realized, okay, it's important to talk about this stuff. Of course, a certain audience won't find it that interesting. Let's put it like that. But it's so important to avoid scenarios like yours. I mean, if you can. If we can prevent a young person just getting started in enhanced bodybuilding, young, for let's say even if it's mid-20s or something like that, just to have a conservative start and not bombing the body as you described. I mean, for this, I would say it's not prevention, but it's a bit of harm reduction. It's so important to create awareness. And I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to just wanted to explain because it sounds very harsh, but back in the day in Poland, that was like a normal knowledge. So it wasn't that he was a bad coach. He just was probably his coach at the time was doing the same, and that was like just like a normal. There was a days in Poland that taking like 400 to 500 micrograms of like spironolactone like 2 weeks before the prep was something normal. Like I was like taking huge amounts of diuretics back in the days, like to the point that I can drop like 7 kilos a day just to fit into my categories and stuff like that. So that was crazy days in Poland, but that wasn't something that was doing by just, I don't know, just wants or needs of the coach to I don't know, to just make a name for himself or something like that. It was just a basic knowledge at the time in Poland. We are just moving very fast with the knowledge over the last 6, 7, 8 years. So
Yeah, I mean, it's same here. You also still have these coaches, I would say. There are some also established coaches over here where you have a moderately good athlete. It's always 700 tests, 700 NPP, 700 of tren, for example. And if the guy is a bit heavier, it's 1,000 of each. So I know this kind of cycle. And I mean, in the end, it's also in the end it's an individual decision, and the athlete carries the responsibility to say, okay, do I want to do that or not? Do I feel well with this recommendation or not? And I mean, I also want to be very clear. I mean, what you've shown here is also physique that is very competitive on a pro qualifier level. And in the end, if we are talking about striving for a pro card, I mean, that's a scenario I want to be very clear. It's not about winning the low doser award or something like that. It's not that. It's just to look at what is necessary, and also in these terms to take the least amount necessary to have some reserves for when you turn pro, for example, to get to the next level. If we can leverage also PED still and not just the other points, because at some point the biggest leverage will be time. When you've perfect nutrition, you have perfect training, you are at the ceiling of your PEDs, that still makes sense before we really arrive at a point of diminishing returns. Then at that point it's only time. And the longer we can take these jokers and play them, the better, just to keep the process accelerated. So for me, just to get back to your initial question, what would I like to have time-wise? Probably it would be 28 weeks out. For just to have an 8-week cruise, and I'm not talking about TRT, I would say something like 300 to 400 mix of total load, either with test only and AI, or could be also in your case with a strong aromatase. I would say it could be something like maybe 250 tests, 150 EQ, and then manage with an anastrozole. And then just to get started, and that would be also maintenance phase for me. I mean, of course, your weight will drop a bit, inflammation will go down a bit, and so on. But in terms of calories in, calories out, I would strive for maintenance. That would go hand in hand with inflammatory reduction and therefore a slight weight drop probably. And then to go back in at 20 weeks out. 20 weeks is just something for me. I like to have 17 to 18 weeks, and then it's 2 to 3 weeks buffer time for slight injuries, for the common cold, for any other stuff, so that I don't have to push you through phases where it would be better for you to have a break. Where we can say, okay, you caught a cold, all right, let's go on maintenance for 2 to 3 days just to allow your body to recover faster, and not to be in a position where I have to say, all right, you have a cold, but we don't have time. So you have to push, maybe you have to push your steps instead of your cardio, you have to remain on low day, rest day calories, and so on. That's why I like the 20 weeks mark roughly, especially with a new athlete. I had athletes 20 weeks out where I saw, okay, all right, I understand the body. I know that they are reacting very well. We can go down to 16 weeks, or if off-season condition is great, maybe even 14 weeks. I'm just starting now a prep with a pro who will start the official prep at 7 weeks out, just because off-season condition was still so great. So of course, also depending on condition and so on. But I take pride in thinking that perfect condition is the one thing we can influence on stage. When off-season is over, maybe we can make some more progress in the first half of the prep. I think growth is still possible if you manage prep well, at least throughout the first 50%, especially throughout the first third. But the majority of work is done. And now it's about presenting the work perfectly. There might be a guy that is 20 pounds heavier or something like that, but what's in our hand is presentation and condition. That's the two things that we can do perfect no matter who's coming. And that's what I'm striving for. And that's why I like to take a bit more time. So I would say that's my starting point. And at 20 weeks out, I mean, it's individual, but let's just say I will just put a generic label on. Let's say you were around 6,000 calories, for example. Just to start with an example, I like to start with a notable drop. So most likely, if your baseline was 6K on average throughout the week with the high day factored in and so on, I would probably go from the 6K to 4.5, 4.7K, just to have, I would say, a good 25% reduction of calories. That will go hand in hand with the notable weight drop. I mean, with the calorie deficit in a stronger manner, stronger reduction of inflammatory markers, less glycogen retention, and therefore also less water retention by less glycogen and less inflammation. But that's usually where I like to start, because in the end, the perfect scenario would be for me, you have enough time, maybe during those 20 weeks you don't get sick, you don't have any forced breaks, and we actually only need 16 weeks. Okay, all right, then we are already at 3 to 4 weeks out, maybe 2 to 3 weeks out. We can really rest the body. We don't have to do a hard shift 7 or 5 days out to give the body a break, but give the body a break already earlier. And I have seen so many positive reactions, especially for those who also had to push their activity pretty hard. To be at a point at 3 to 4 weeks out where you can go to a baseline of maybe 8 to 10K steps and no cardio. And at many points with athletes, that was the point where metabolism really got crazy, positive in a crazy manner. And that's why I like to strive for this timeline roughly. So long monologue, that's my take.
Great. So do you want to hear about my cardio and steps at the time? Because I was like, I'm just going to tell you, like 6 times 25 minutes of cardio and 8 NK steps a day was something that was pretty much normal for me. So could we go into a training? Because I'm really curious, how would you like switch it up, or what do you do with my setup at the time? At the time I was training like 5 times a week, was 2 push, 2 times back, I believe, and 1 time was leg days, just because my leg days was predominant. So, and on the back, if I remember correctly, I've done additional like volume for my hamstrings. So that was like my setup, and I was doing like a kind of like low volume, high intensity approach, but with a lot of intensifiers. So for example, like in total, I might do like 6 to 7 sets for my chest, but a couple of the sets gonna be like rest pauses or like stretching the bottoms or something like that. Or I can do like 6 sets for my quads, but that was like within the 100 reps of leg presses at the end with not stop, or like a Widowmaker or something that's pretty much destroying me totally. Yeah. So that was like the setup. So how would you assess that? And what would you do with all of those intensifiers throughout the whole prep?
I would do the initial plan. First point, I would do the initial plan most likely with straight sets only. I like the intention of the split, so I think in your case, quads once per week is more than sufficient. I would even make an argument. So start. I mean, let's say for the evolution of the split, we would have started in off season. Then I would have started you on 2 push and 2 pull sessions per week and 1 leg session, and then I would have even maybe shifted the legs further. So some remaining hamstring volumes on the pull days, I think that's a great idea. But for quads, I have seen so many guys with strong quads. I mean, the first reference in history is Tom Platz training the quads every 14 days. And I did these cases. For example, we started off season on push, pull off, push, pull legs off. And maybe on the first pull session a bit hamstring volume, not because your hamstrings are weak, but for the sake of symmetry, because your quads are so strong. And when I see, okay, all right, there is still over proportional growth in the quads, I might even go push, pull off, push, pull off, push, pull legs. So then going to every 10 days. And that has also worked quite well. I mean, I have had one extreme case where the guy had great lower body overall, great quads, hamstrings, calves, and glutes. And there, at one point in the off season, just to test the waters, I told him, all right, no leg days at all anymore. Just push, pull off, repeat, and I will let you know when your next leg day is due when I see the legs getting worse. And I think with these crazy strong muscle groups, especially with enhanced athletes, I'm certain it's also a notable matter of androgen receptor density in the respective muscle, because there is only one reason. If you have muscle that was actually built by mechanical tension, of course also with enhancement, and the muscle remains the same without a training stimulus for weeks, then we know it has to be the androgens doing their job. And it's just for me, and that's also true in a prep, the less we have to do to keep it at least the same, the better. I mean, I think it's good to have strengths. I wouldn't say, okay, we have to downsize your quads to match the symmetry of your body. No, that's bullshit. I also think a perfectly balanced physique is always something that is, in terms of bodybuilding judging, it's maybe perfect. In terms of the subjective judge, I think more than... I mean, who do you think about? I mean, let's take Dexter Jackson, for example. Perfect example of a balanced athlete. And of course, also, maybe you shouldn't be rest in peace, but maybe you shouldn't be also a Sean Roden where you have a really, really weak muscle group like the back. That should be also it. But to have an eye catcher, especially the quads walking out, I mean, it's good. And so just to be very clear, I would deprioritize them to the point where they still keep their volume and not to size them down by deprioritization. I would give you, if we continue with deprioritization, I would give you rather low arm volume on the end of the push and pull days. So that would be most likely for me. Honestly speaking, if we start with the first split and do two push and pull sessions per week, honestly speaking, it would be 2 to 3 sets for biceps and triceps each after the respective push and pull sessions. So that would be more than sufficient for me. I would definitely, for the push days, start you probably rather on 2 than on 1 fly variation, because your arms are so damn strong that every top half of pressing will be taken over by your triceps. So I would definitely go with isolation on the push days first. So for example, maybe just something that comes to mind would be really to say, okay, maybe we will do regular butterfly, lateral raises, incline flies, maybe a Y raise or another lateral raise variation. So these 4 exercises first, and then get into 1 pressing movement for chest and 1 pressing movement for shoulders, and then triceps, and then done. Rough outline. And I mean, same also goes for back. So I would really strive to find exercises. I mean, I don't know how it was with your arms, but I have seen many athletes with these strong arms where the biceps also became limiting for pulling range of motion partially. So for example, athletes with a wide grip pull down had their biceps in the way and couldn't pull any lower but it would have been good for the lat development. Did you experience this? Were you also already limited in your range of motion by your arms?
To be honest, I believe I don't. I have always have a really huge problem when it comes to connection to my back when I done it like both arms. So that might be
Yeah.
it. But most oftenly I was training it at the end of my career like a unilateral because that was something that I can connect really well, and you can see it right now. But after a while when I was like in a pretty good shape, my back is definitely lagging as well, especially when it comes to the density, because I've like dropped a lot of the fullness from my back. It was like some guys like hold their fullness in their legs and they shrink a lot. My legs is like to stay, but my back and chest like to shrink a lot. So that's also something that's coming out really like visible in a like very good shape. So that's something that's definitely was probably because I for years I have a huge problem to connect with my chest
Yeah.
as well as my back. So probably that's it.
Yeah. And so it's for me also, I completely get the idea of unilateral work, especially for any pull downs and lat focused rows, just because it allows you to keep the angle here a bit more open. If you're working bilaterally, I mean, even if you're doing a frontal plane pull down, I'm a huge fan also of doing a single arm frontal plane pull down. So just to have the cable coming from here, have the bench here, and to really pull from here, because it allows you also to have more of an open arm angle compared to pulling vertically and going very close here. I mean, that's fine tuning, of course, but that would be, I mean, if we talk about the pull part, I mean, the back density looks very solid. So I would say if we talk about development groups, it's to put it like that. We have let's do the physique analysis the other way around. Notable strengths, definitely quads and arms. And then I would say calling chest, shoulders, back, and hamstring a weakness would be too strong of a word. It's just that they need a bit more. So it's in these terms, I always go with quads and arms. Tell me that they can be deprioritized in terms of volume, in terms of frequency, perhaps in both terms. And so from here on, I mean, for the pull day, we already mentioned it. I would put the biceps very low. And honestly speaking, if we have that one pull day, for example, we have push pull with hamstrings off, push pull legs off, I would just give you 2 or 3 sets of your preferred hamstring curl at the beginning of the pull session, just because it won't take away anything. Then I would do the whole back part and probably have 2 to 3 pull down or row variation in terms of lat focus, maybe 1 pull over variation, and then some trap focus stuff, maybe a calzo shrug even, just to take out the arms further. With all this pull down volume and pull over volume, what we need, I wouldn't do any direct rear delt work because sagittal transverse plane is already putting a shitload of work on the rear delts, and then I would just put the 2 to 3 sets at the end. And there, for example, I'm really easy on it. I don't know, maybe you know Anthony Yale, the French IFBB pro. It's also a guy with great arms. He's doing an upper lower split from my side, for example, at the moment. And I draw at the end of the upper session, there is 2 sets biceps of choice, 2 sets triceps of choice. There is just something, it can be a shitty exercise, honestly speaking, just need a regular stimulus on the muscle group. And that will be also true for your arms, I think. And then leg day wise, for me, heavy focus on glutes and hamstrings just to get them to catch up. And then especially here, I would say, especially for your quads, I think straight sets will do the job. I'm generally not the biggest fan of intensifiers, but if you told me, hey, Fabian, that's something I love it fulfills me, it gives me training pleasure, then, and that's also something very important, then that would be something we would talk about in the beginning before I write the plan based on the assumptions that I just made, asking you, what exercises do you definitely want to have in the plan no matter what? Any exercises you don't want to have in your plan no matter what? And any other things that I should take into account. And if you told me, for example, hey, I love drop sets, I love doing some other kind of intensifiers, then I would work them in where I think it's a solid choice, maybe just to give it to a weakness or something like that. But I wouldn't waste any recovery capacities of your strong muscle groups with intensifiers. So that would be the rough outline of my planning. And
Great.
to finish it off, I would stay with push-pull off, push-pull legs throughout the prep. I would do the experiment if you can also take less leg days in the next off-season and not during prep.
Great. So that's gonna be like an ending of the training topic for today. But so I'm gonna ask for the general question for all those guys who are listening, and maybe they wanted to pull something out of this for themselves. What is the biggest mistake bodybuilders make during the off-season phase, in your opinion, when it comes to the training as well as transitioning into the contest?
Also, you mean also transitioning the training into the contest prep?
Yeah, because
would.
probably the biggest mistake is going to lay down something in the middle of those phases, because that's often to see.
I would say, I would honestly say, if you have, use the off season to establish a proper training program that is proven to work, and take it exactly as it is into contest prep, and don't change a thing. I'm really of the opinion that if you have a recoverable training program in the off season, you shouldn't be limited by your recovery capacities before you are something like 4 to 6 weeks out. At that point, maybe if your recovery is really lagging behind, we could discuss taking out 1 or 2 sets per session, not per muscle, but per session total. Before that, a constant training program is the best gauge that you have that your prep is going well. Because, of course, you will have other contributors to strength loss. Your leverages will change. You lose body fat. Especially if you lose body fat around the shoulder girdle in your back, you will have more range of motion in pressing and pulling movements. Pressing movements is something that I see decreasing in performance first always when people get lean. Also, for example, automatically more range of motion on your quad compounds. So also here potential strength loss, but that's punctual. That's just single exercises. If we talk about overall performance, there shouldn't be any decrease in your overall performance if everything goes according to plan in your life, in your nutrition, in your sleep, and so on, before you're really close to contest prep. And that's why I like to keep it constant, because we have this feedback from the training program. So I would say the biggest mistake I have never done, but maybe that's something people do, changing anything around just for the sake of prep, because I just don't think it's necessary. It makes things less controllable, and that's why I would say continuity is the right thing. And also, I would say, if we talk about then transitioning deeper into prep, now I talked about keeping your performance stable, keeping your performance increasing, and so on. At that point where you're getting really lean, where you also feel that, okay, the water is low, joints are getting a bit more, I won't say achy, but a bit more sensitive. When you are at that point at 4 to 6 weeks out, then it's not about progression or retention of performance is your measurement. At some point late in prep, the most important measurement for me is quality work. And I don't care at all if quality work means that you're still getting stronger, that you're staying constant, or that you're maybe even reducing weight just to keep the movement quality-wise very high. Because in enhanced bodybuilding, we are all on a shitload of gear, so we don't have to worry that if training is subjectively 5% less aggressive for the sake of control and hitting the target, that won't do anything bad for you. What will do something bad for you is constantly trying to keep performance on PR level 2 to 3 weeks out and then getting hurt. That will hurt your competition.
So is there anything that was changed in your mind about the training over the last, like, let's say 5 years?
I would say what has changed a bit. Of course, there's also nuances, but the major thing that comes to mind, I have been, after, I would say, the last 4 years maybe were the ones where I put the most education in, maybe I would say from now on 5 to 1.5 years back. From there on, I said, okay, I'm right now at a point where I'm just applying with athletes, where I say, okay, the best part of my further development as a coach is just practical application and doing case-by-case findings. But what has changed generally is that I'm way more flexible with the volume that I'm using. So I have always been a lower kind of volume guy when I started the journey, and that is it has always worked out quite well. But, and that's I won't say it's a mistake, but it's something that I'm doing now better. I haven't tested initially a few years back. I haven't tested athletes enough. For example, they are on a perfect plan. Everything is going well. Progression is in, no injuries, no aches. The plan is working perfectly. But why not try to add 1 or 2 sets per session to weak muscle groups? Why not try it? If off-season, as I mentioned, I wouldn't do this in prep, but if we have enough time in the off-season, why not try to do it? I mean, the perfect example where I did this right now at this very point in time. I assume you know William, the German guy who moved to Poland? Yeah, so he just got his pro card. Yeah. And I'm doing his training, and I put him at the beginning. I mean, he had a short off season before the pro card. I think it was 6 to 8 weeks of off season, and then straight into prep. And I put him on a 2-way split with very conservative volume, because I just wanted to make sure, okay, we have everything prioritized and deprioritized according to his needs. We have all essential movement patterns. We are not playing any games, because in the end, you jump. What could happen is you jump from 8 weeks off season into prep. You have 16 weeks. And you have this accumulation of fatigue, and it interferes also with the judging of how good is progress physique-wise. Maybe you're unnecessarily inflamed and so on. So I just took the conservative approach, and right now, after achieving the pro card, after starting in Alicante, William now told me, okay, I'm going to do an open end off season, so to say. It doesn't matter if I start in 1 year or 1.5 years. And okay, then now we can play around. Let's do the 3-way split instead of a 2-way split, and let's put the volume a bit higher. And just maybe also for a reference point for everyone, what means putting it a bit higher for me. The split changed, but generally speaking, we had 4 training days per week with 15 sets per session. And right now, we have a 3 on, 1 off with the same amounts of sets per session. So it's still 15. So it's basically the same amount of working sets, but with the overall higher frequency of training days. Not a higher frequency per muscle group, but a higher frequency of training days. And that's something where we just stay in touch. And that's also something where you need an experienced athlete. Because, for example, if I'm putting 6 sets of heavy quad compound work in his plan, and I know, okay, that's pushing him, especially compared to the previous plan. And if I find out, or if I get the feedback from, okay, that session roasted me, my CNS is over, I can't sleep at night, I get cold sweats and so on, then I know, okay, reduce it right away. But maybe there's also muscle groups, for example, we did that for shoulders, where we double or triple the volume from the previous off-season plan, and then there is still no complaint about recovery. All right, maybe then I'm going to quadruple the volume. Maybe I'm going even up further. Maybe you have a strong muscle group that still needs quite a lot of volume to stay a strong muscle group. Maybe you have a weak muscle group that needs very low volume to grow. Maybe you have a weak muscle group that needs very high volume to grow. And if we talk about the learnings, then it is playing around here. I also have, I would say it's a very ambitious lifestyle client. He was on a 2-way split. Progress was rather mediocre. And right now, I looked at those points. I asked him from the experience in the past, and basically he was always rather training. The tendency to stall in progress had already happened several times in the past, and in the past he was training even a bit more volume and frequency wise than he was when he was stalling again with me. So what I told him is, all right, let's try 3 sessions per week, 2 upper sessions, 1 lower session. For 9 months now, best progress ever. And let me be very clear, that's a big exception. That's something I have done once. But I wouldn't have found it out if I had just tried it. Just told him, do it. And he also told me a few days ago, I wouldn't have tried it if I wasn't stuck with your advice and would do what you told me. And at these points, you also question yourself as a coach. Am I doing the best thing right now? Is it really reasonable? And then I told myself, all right, if we don't try it together, we will never find it out. And that's something that I would say I have learned. I have never been stuck to principles, but being even more flexible with what you see in front. I mean, I assume you've also seen it. That's a topic for another day. You can have all the expectation horizon with PEDs. You see everything. You see guys like you on solid amounts of EQ with a perfect hematocrit. You see guys on 300 tests and nothing else with a 54 hematocrit. So it's just, there is so much individual variance, and I would say that's my biggest learning. Also, not what I told is not just applicable to training, but to everything. I mean, I think it's still very important to have your theoretical education, theoretical evidence, to build your expectation on that, but to always be ready to see deviations from that expectation, and that also the deviation can be 180 degrees around of what literature gave you as an horizon.
Yeah, definitely. And to the point of that AQ and hematocrit, I do believe that most often the times it was just because the athletes are not paying attention to the small details, like doing the cardio year round, like keeping their diet very, very clean, and like get rid of unnecessary iron in their diet and supplementation, because some guys are not even aware that they are in taking iron because of that multivitamins and stuff like that. Like having enough fluids, like taking ARBs, are something that may potentially lowers your hematocrit and hemoglobin. So there's a lot of different things that people just are not paying attention to, and I know that because I've have a quite a large amount of clients who was sure about that they are genetically prone to having like a high hematocrit levels and stuff like that. And after a while, like 3, 4, 5 months, all of a sudden it's get lower and lower and lower. So you have to remember that if you wanted to recheck it, you need to take at least like 120 days. This is something that we have to aware of. So yeah. But going on like further in the topic, because we are up more than an hour in, and I have like a shit ton of questions, to be honest. So let's get through the diet rather quickly, because that's probably the easiest one, to be honest. How would you structure the nutrition around the whole, like you said, like almost 20 weeks? What would be the sign to add calories, or like even like take calories or even add calories in some part? And how would you monitor my I don't know, like fullness reaction, or maybe like my I don't know, what would be the ticking points that you will just watch very closely to make the best decision for myself?
So maybe just to tick this box off, I think we can tick off training for the whole prep, because that's a stable nutrition-wise. I mean, let's say we start with a roughly 25% calorie reduction. Your basic activity is more than sufficient for me. I mean, if we reduce calories by 25%, we remain with 8K steps and 25 minutes of cardio. I would be rather easy on adding in the next step a bit more activity, because your legs are a strength. So I wouldn't push it to eternity, but I would say I would give myself maybe roughly a peak activity budget for you of around maybe 14K steps or 15K steps and 40 to 45 minutes cardio per day. That's something where I would say, but that's in two or three steps and not coming at one hit, so to say. At the beginning, I would say, I mean, also assuming right now you have been on a blast, and of course maybe we did a slight cruise before, but you won't have a recomposition like Kevin Levrone being off training and steroids for half a year and then throwing it all back in. So that's why I would be, let's say we have 20 weeks for the first 6 to 8 weeks. I'm just keen on seeing the scale weight going down. And as long as you don't drop something like 3 or 4 kilograms in a week, I wouldn't be worried. I mean, even if it's 2 to 3 kilos inflammation driven in the first week, I would be rather relaxed. And from there on, I would just, I would say at maybe 12 weeks, around 12 weeks out, maybe sooner, maybe a bit later. I would also, what I very much like to do is daylight post-workout check-ins. So the perfect thing for me is always have a course room or something like that. So daylight from the side, slight shadowing, and then just to see how do you look post-workout, and then to have 2 reference points per week. And then it's just a matter of your physique. How does it react? How does your body react? How does your, so for example, I just had a client on prep who was perfect prep right now, 8 kilograms in the first 8 weeks, so 1 kilogram per week. And then he was complaining, sleep is getting a bit worse, but training performance is good, sleep is good, work stress is not higher than usually. And then I just told him, okay, all right, let's take 2 or 3 days off. That was my implication, because I said, okay, you lost a lot of fat, but you're still far away from contest lean. That's not a refeed scenario for me. That's a recovery management scenario for me. And so I do the refeeds in a rather reactive way. So for example, let's say you're coming from 125 kilos, right? And then let's just put some theoretic numbers on it. We are 10 weeks into the prep, we drop 12 kilograms, you are at 113. And then maybe I would just start giving you points throughout the week where I say, I don't want you any lower than that. So for example, to say you start the week with 113, I don't want you below 111.5. If you fall below, if you stand up in the morning and you are under 111.5, check in. Do your pictures, send them to me, send the weight to me. And then I can take a decision to say, okay, maybe you dropped another 1.5 to 2 kilograms, but you still look great. Let's go on. Maybe you look suddenly flat. And that's where I also need to get to know you, because you also know these athletes. You have guys that you can push to death and they don't get flat. There are some athletes that are just so round that flatness is not an indication for them. And that's still no reason to push them through. So you have to look a bit more on their recovery feedback and so on. So refeeds for me, very reactive. I think in enhanced bodybuilding, with such a short time frame compared to natty preps, I think it's just no issue to push through. It should be possible, and pushing through doesn't mean not to do any refeeds, but not to plan them. For example, if I'm working with natural athletes, most of the time, not always, I really have planned maintenance phases because these guys are partially doing 35 to 40 week preps to get really inside out. And then you take this length of prep to have maintenance phases in between. So I would say just keep it moving, and especially in the first half of the prep, if the weight drop doesn't meet my expectation, fire right after. Because the last situation I want to be in is to tell you 3 weeks out, okay, we have to do another hard push because we are not here yet. I don't say we have to be ready at 3 weeks out, but we should be at a very conservative rate of loss and not in a situation where we have to say, okay, we have to pull out the sledgehammer right now because we are behind. And that's why I would always rather take the aggressive decision earlier than later.
Definitely. So, like previously, what is the biggest mistakes diet-wise that clients in the contest prep are making? I'm maybe specifically I'm going to ask about those experienced clients, because we both know that clients, there are 2 types of clients: those who striking to eat more, and those who are trying to constantly eat less just because they think that the sooner they're gonna be stage ready, the better. For example, they see on Instagram that some IFBB pros at the top level is 8 to 10, 12 weeks out and has striated glutes, so they think that they are behind because of that. So yeah, the question was.
I mean, I would say, to be very clear, I think under or overeating is both the same. It's both no adherence to the plan. So I don't see you any better as an athlete if you eat less or do more activity than you should than the other way around. So I would say what I would call an experienced athlete is someone who's able to stick to the plan, and then we rather look at the surroundings. So, I mean, we can talk about, I mean, caloric adherence, activity adherence is a given for me. And activity adherence is individual. Cardio can be steered precisely. steps can vary also through your job and everything else. And last thing I want to do, if you say, okay, I'm 8 weeks out, I'm going shopping with my wife because she needs some time with me, and you double your steps because you're in the city all day, then I won't tell you you didn't adhere to the plan or something like that. But let's say as far as it goes where you can steer it actively, adherence is a given for me. And there I would say it's rather, if you have athletes who are allowed to eat a bit more flexible, as I mentioned, steered with a human brain, with a functioning human brain, I'm fine with if it fits your macros, in terms of you can switch out your rice for potatoes or something like that without asking me, as long as you don't do it in peak week or something like that. That's also fine for me. But to choose heavy volume foods. So for example, you have these almost 0-calorie noodles. You have all in your soy, so psyllium husk or something like that. The guys start stretching their oatmeal. Their 100 gram oatmeal becomes a 3-liter bowl or something like that. And that's also, for example, sipping soft drinks nonstop, doing this whole artificial sweetener stuff. I'm no enemy of artificial sweeteners, but I'm an enemy of going way above your previous baseline just for saturation or satisfaction purposes, And I would say it's also a major issue to trying to volumize your food will always backfire, because the only thing that you're doing is extending your stomach volume, and when it's maybe you're feeling filled for 20 to 30 minutes, but when it gets empty again, the previously stretched stomach will feel even emptier. Another thing is more about digestion. Oh, I mean, we need to have a rough idea I need to know, for example, how many times per day are you on the toilet to see how it changes? Because we have guys, for example, also me. I mean, I didn't need much calories. At my peak weight of 130 kilograms, I had 12K steps in, and I still had to eat only 5,000 calories. I was never an 8,000 calorie guy. You have other guys. I had an athlete pretty much same height, same size as me, going to the toilet 6 to 8 times per day. But I need a baseline, because for me, going to toilet only once a day, it was normal for me and not an indication of bad digestion when it was just every 2 days, just because food was so low. But if the guy who usually goes to the toilet 6 times a day starts going once every 2 days, we have an issue here. And that's where many people try to take laxatives or something like that just to force it out. And that's the worst thing you can do, because if you start this somewhat early in prep, and somewhat early is also 4 to 6 weeks out, you won't be able to go to the toilet without it. And that will just make things worse. So having an eye on how digestion behaves in relation to caloric reductions, because some people will also with notably less calories require a similar fiber amount than in the off season, and some will need a notable reduction proportional to the calorie reduction to keep a good digestion. But that's on the coach and not on the athlete. That's why I would say the most important thing and the biggest mistake overall is not communicating. It's not communicating, because the athlete thinks he has to buy through it. So, for example, I had one athlete. I don't know what he was saying. I think it was GHKCU, just for his skin, also throughout the prep. And at some point he switched the supplier. And then after the last show, he told me, my hands were feeling a bit dizzy. It was something like I was on GH or something like that. Why didn't you tell me? The last peak was totally different than the other ones. You suddenly lost way more water. You looked completely different. You were sweating on stage, and then maybe it was something. I won't say it was GH, but maybe it was just something like in GHRP or ipamorelin or something like that. And so that's these small things of communication. I always tell the guys, the closer that we get to competition, no matter if it's nutrition, digestion, side effects, sleep quality, anger management, whatever, I need all the information, because things can change. Best example for me, I had an athlete coming from another coach. He's with me since 2 or 3 years right now, but the old coach, I had him on 700 tren per week. He had no issues at all. No issues at all. And then we were a few weeks out, and he was on 200 tren per week. And he started communicating things where I would say, okay, that's a tren head. just minor things, or that one set I had to wait 5 minutes for the machine, and right now my whole training was shit. So it was completely, it just wasn't reasonable. I just told him, you know what, please throw out the tren. So it was tren A. 5 days later, hey, Fabian, I'm doing well again, I'm feeling good. And just not to have the expectation, yeah, of course, that guy took 700 tren in the past, 200 won't be an issue. Just give me the information and I can work on that.
Yeah, definitely. So when you've mentioned trend, so that's very smoothly like pointing us into the direction of PEDs. So what would be the compound of choice, and how would you assess my current like PEDs like stock throughout the whole of season? I'm sorry, contest prep. Because like probably you want to pull off those folding on sometimes or not. Probably you want to change it up the test or not, or maybe add some DHT or not, or take it out or switch it up my natural one source or not.
Honestly speaking, I'm a big fan of also, just like with training, if we have a generally good off-season stack, I would keep the test and EQ baseline actually the same, and also the anastrozole, because otherwise we jump around back and forth with the E2 management. Let's say I'm switching you right now from the 1.2 test and 900 boldenone to I'm switching you to whatever 500 test and 1.6 of masteron. So the same total load. I don't know how you aromatize at 400 test. I don't want to find out 16 weeks out. I don't want to send you to the lab every 2 weeks. So for E2 management, I would keep it stable. But if we keep the test EQ and anastrozole cycle stable as it is, we are already on the lower end of EQ, of estradiol. And so we have to monitor that it doesn't get too low. So what I would keep open with reducing body fat, maybe to shift a bit of the EQ towards test, just to ensure that we have constant estradiol level and that they are not decreasing to 10 or something like that while you're getting leaner. Other than that, I would switch, maybe not in the first week, maybe not 20 weeks out, but latest 16 weeks out. I would maybe do a 1-to-1 switch or a slight increase and switch out the NPP for masteron or for primobolan. Maybe I would say at that scenario I would be open. It doesn't have to be a 1-to-1 350 replacement. Could be also 500 of a DHT derivative of what you can get. And but that would be it for I would say until maybe 12 weeks out. I usually don't like to utilize clenbuterol way before 12 weeks out. That's where I usually keep clen and T3 at hand. I'm usually a fan of just going for I push T3 only supraphysiologically if it's really needed. Otherwise, I'm just a big proponent of just keeping it stable. If you get, I don't know about Poland, but the pharmacy T3 here in Germany is 20 micrograms. So I just like to go with 10 and 10 as a replacement therapy. If you get the usual ULAB stuff, it can be also 12.5 twice a day. But I don't go supraphysiological if I don't have to. With the clenbuterol, I always like to think that we have until 12 weeks out and also potentially until 10 weeks out. We should have so many levers with calories and activity that it's just not needed before that. Buterol, something like to ramp up 20 microgram wise, so really 20, 40, 60, 80. Not in 4 weeks, but every time I think we need an increase just to do this step. Usually the reaction in terms of resting heart rate, tremor, and so on is way more moderate with 20 microgram increases compared to 40 microgram increases or even higher. So that's where I like to be conservative. Tren is something, I make the usage of tren a bit the start. First of all, the if usage of tren, if you have very negative experience in terms of insomnia, in terms of aggressiveness, you still have to be handled. You have to be able to handle your work, your partner, and so on. I don't want you out of work and in a divorce when you're leaving prep. So if you know that you can't handle yourself or that you can sleep on tren, I don't hesitate at all not to use it at all. It's perfectly fine. But let's say you can carry it. I make it a bit more dependent. When to start tren is also for me dependent on how long is your season. If we have 2 competitions or something like that, then I say, okay, and we can also throw it out 10 weeks out. if we have a season that could potentially last 2 to 3 months across several pro qualifiers, I rather like to go with a 6 weeks out mark. So I would say trend is a 6 to 10 weeks out mark for me. It's usually for a lighter guy, it would be maybe even 70 per week. So starting with 10 daily. I prefer Tren A because it's more flexible. I prefer daily for Tren A because it keeps level more stable. And as I think, especially with Tren, fluctuation of the injections is a major cause of these unwell feelings with Tren. But maybe with a guy your size, I would most likely start with 20 a day and maybe ramp it up throughout prep to 40 a day, so to 80 total per week. But I wouldn't go any higher than that. And maybe I would even introduce 20 per day and leave it at that. A big proponent of oxandrolone at a later point in prep, maybe 6 to 8 weeks out, as a performance enhancement drug, so really as a pre-training performance, not systemically. I mean, when we throw it in, and we can also put in, for example, 50 mix pre, we can also use 50 mix, 50-50 split on the rest days. That won't hurt anybody. But it's major thing for me is the performance push, and then I like to go with Winstrol around. Depends on the athlete, depends on how far you are, but around the 3 to 4 weeks out mark, I like to use Winstrol. I think Winstrol is the better trenbolone, just in terms of what it does to the plasticity of the athlete. So I would tend to say what people hope to get with Tren, they get it more often with Winstrol. And it's just, for me, it's 40 to 60 a day, and it works wonders. And for me, the majority of the effects is achieved, I think. I have some athletes, when they have a longer season and some breaks in between competitions, I pull it out and put it back in 10 days out. But, and that's something I had a discussion with a very educated friend of mine, who's also maybe a candidate for your podcast. There is actually clinical data on Winstrol use in dermatology. So it's not just bro science that Winstrol is doing its job for the plasticity of the skin and the muscle. There is actual application data in dermatology. So that's something where I will maybe tend to use Winstrol with an athlete earlier, just to see if there is any positive skin adaptations beyond the initial plasticity reaction of the athlete if it's in for a bit longer. But that also depends, because for Winstrol, I had several cases where I experienced the textbook guy, 2 weeks in, my joints are dry as fuck. And your joints can get drier, but if you get scared of every hard working set because the Winstrol is in, okay, but then I still think it's a great drug to use, but then as late as possible.
Yeah. I do believe that there are dry joints more because of estradiol, not because of Winnie. I do believe that Winnie actually might help with joint lubrication, to be honest, just because of that collagen and how they say it, like collagen increased because of it. But let's finish the PEDs question, and I'm gonna ask you about how long before the stage would you pull out all the injectables, and do you bump it up the orals just like a couple days before, or it's highly depends on certain situation?
I would say usually I like to pull the orals, the injects around 5 days out. I'm a big proponent of, if the athlete tolerates it, injection sport wise, I'm a big proponent of L-carnitine inject. I usually like to pull the L-carnitine injects even a bit earlier, maybe even 2 to 3 weeks out, just because it's a big injection volume, and it's just additional scar tissue. So that's the only thing that I might even pull earlier. The regular injects, I would say roughly 5 days out. And usually I will keep the oral baseline. For example, we might just keep it a bit more stable and maybe double down on the oxandrolone and do 50-50, so 50 twice a day. And Winstrol, I would even keep it the same. So I like to do a little oral bump 1 day out and maybe even show day, but that's more for acute peaking purposes and not just for having in mind to keep the hormone levels more stable or something like that. So usually generally speaking, there might be a slight elevation of orals after the injects have been pulled, but the majority of the job from my side is pulling the injections, and I think I assume you have seen the same. You can see with an athlete who is in stage-ready condition that the injections are just causing inflammation because the look improves usually notably. There are also guys where I might pull it 3 days out, but that's just an approach.
So how about GH throughout the whole prep and then right before the stage? How would you decide to leave it, decrease it, or just leave it, or just take it out totally?
I would say it depends on how high you are. I mean, with going with your 10 units, I would definitely not touch that until 12 weeks out. From there on, I would just make an evaluation of how has your physique developed, and do I think you're still looking a bit watery, and maybe I would taper it down to 6 to 8. Let's say I taper it down at 10 weeks out to 6 I use. Then I would make a final call at 3 to 4 weeks out. How do you look like? And maybe I make even a final call 1 week out, but usually 3 to 4 weeks out, I can make a decision. And that's no right or wrong. That's so dependent on the individual look. Do I think that you're getting ready in perfect shape with the GH in? Then I will leave it, because otherwise I'm playing around with electrolyte balance. I'm playing around with water retention and so on. And then I just might end up having to load you on a rather unpredictable amount of extra carbs to get the fullness back that was lost from the GH. Other way around, if I think you're a bit watery, I will rather pull it out. So it really depends on your look, but I would say more often times than not, I'm pulling it out completely. And that before peak week, because I don't want the acute effects of GH removal when I'm doing daily peak week check-ins and just trying to see what's happening to the body. I want to make it predictable. So if I'm pulling it, it will be rather 2 to 3 weeks out.
Great. So how about because you mentioned clenbuterol, about how about the all others, like maybe like a GH fragment or like yohimbine, or maybe some even peptides you use, like SLU you've mentioned, maybe not C, or maybe anything else that you could add to my stack just to make sure that that could be a little bit better. And what about the GLP-1s?
Honestly, I'm not that big on so many peptides. I very much like the GHKCU, just if I think your skin can improve, or if you have some loose skin or something like that. I think it has done great job for skin improvement. I mean, TB500 BPC is just application driven. If there is any inflammation in you, that's not a general. I like to have a baseline of SLUPP. That's completely individual. I have had athletes that have tried 5 to 10 mix. Yeah, I would say it was okay, but I would say SLUPP has become, for me, in the majority of the job, it has become an LDL cholesterol improver. It has done so much good, as I mentioned in the beginning, with maybe up to 1 mg. So it's a nice add-on, but optional. Mod C, yeah, here and there, but definitely not as stable. Definitely something where I would say with 90% of athletes that I send into prep, I don't even have it at the back of my head. So not big on this stuff. So I really like to work with the basics here, I would say, and less is more. Carnitine inject, I'm a big proponent, but outside, that's also not a peptide. Outside of that, really application driven and not using it generally per se. GLPs, I would say it's also so individually dependent. I still like to say, if you can do it without it, do it without it, just also for in terms of digestion and so on. But that's really case by case. I have seen athletes where it has worked perfectly well. I would like to use, I would go rather with semaglutide or tirzepatide, just because I think the glucagon properties of retatrutide are just not needed for a bodybuilder, especially not a bodybuilder in a caloric deficit with high activity and so on. Because I have had several cases. Let's assume you have the GH still in. You have the resting heart increase from the GH, maybe from the T3, from the clan, and then also from the retatrutide. I had guys walking around close to contest prep with a resting heart rate of 80 or something like that. And told, sorry, can't work. I also had guys with all this stuff in walking around at 50. So it's highly individual. But if I would really like to GLP-1s or a second generation, then GLP-1 plus GLP. But I think the look is, I would pull it anyway, latest 10 days out, just also for loading, because for the carb loading, we need your digestion on regular speed and not on slow motion. And from there on, I would just keep it out throughout prep. So I have, for example, I pull it out 10 days out. If you use it, let's say you have a show the next week, not back in at all. If you have a show 2 weeks later, maybe one shot the day after the show and then stop it again. But I still think this is something, and I have several athletes that have used it, and I'm completely open if an athlete is telling me, hey, it's making me perform better also at work, for example, because I have a responsibility, I'm not so food driven and so on. I'm completely fine with it. Don't get me wrong. I just think if you can avoid it all, or if you use it at the lowest dose possible, it will do good for you.
Great. Has your opinion changed about the prep over the last couple of years, or always pretty much the same?
I would say it's my most things remain very similar. I would say I'm still more than ever. I'm saying I want to have one prep with an athlete to find out what is the perfect prep duration for the respective athlete. There are some guys that profit so much from 20 to 22 weeks preps. There are other guys where I say, okay, even if they're on the higher end of body fat at the start of prep, they can do it easily in 14 to 16 weeks. But I would never gamble that with an athlete where I'm doing the first prep just because I want the best package possible. And that's also what I tell the guys when I know they profit from longer preps. I just tell them, you're gonna feel like shit anyway throughout the season. Doesn't matter if you've done 14 or 20 weeks of diet previously. You arrive at the not nice body fat level anyway at rather the same point in time, and from there on it will be fight mode anyway. But other than playing around with prep durations, I would say it's prep. I think a lot of bodybuilding itself and a lot of bodybuilding coaching is not just science, it's just also, it's a certain kind of art, I would say, with the person that you have in front of you. So for sure, I have deviated hundreds of times from statements that I did now, not in the complete contrary, but in the adaptation of maybe one subtopic with an individual reaction or feedback from the athlete. So I would say the general approach has stayed rather similar, but the exceptions from the rule become more common the more athletes you work.
Okay. So let's end it up with couple question. It's gonna be more like a broad because it's so hard to like even trying to imagine within athletes because it's gonna be like probably known closer to the peak. But I'm gonna ask you about the peak week. How would you like prepare your athletes for the peak week, and how long before the show would you started those like mystical prep like peak week?
So I think a lot is described very easy. I will, no matter what I'm doing one day out, I will keep water and salt and electrolyte intake completely stable and unchanged until one day out. Maybe we will change something one day out, maybe we won't. Until then, it's completely stable. As soon as possible, at least 4 to 5 days out, bring back activity to an absolute baseline. So I would, in a perfect world, I would like 5 to 7 days out, get back to a 10K step line and no cardio, maybe even an 8K step line, just to be able to rest the body. From 7 to 8 days out, no training to failure anymore, just leaving roughly 1 in the tank. Not training soft, not going high volume, not changing the training plan itself, just leaving a bit in the tank. Planning the training days properly, that we have the last leg day 5 to 7 days out, 5 to 8 days out, just also depends on the rotation previously. But I mean, carb loading, that's something that is really impossible to say. I mean, I've had guys that have been on 6 days of 1,000 to 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000 grams of carbs. I have had a guy this year, and he was just he wasn't getting down. So he wasn't getting flat, and that was a heavy guy. That was 1.68 meters, 100 kilo stage weight. So that was a solid guy. And he was dieting throughout the last 3 weeks on 1,600 calories. And for the loading process, he ate Thursday, Friday, 2,000 calories. That's it. And if you had seen him on stage, you could think he was on 200 mg of Anadrol or something like that. That guy was on stage on Saturday at 6 o'clock p.m. and he ate 3 rice cakes throughout the whole day. And then you have the other guys that get on stage at 6 p.m. and you have to think, shit, how much food can I get into them as early as possible on the day so that they don't get flat but the stomach is full. So the carb loading process is something that is where I also wouldn't like to give away guidelines because it's so individual. I mean, we have it with the German pros. Tim Budesheim also was loading on 300 grams of carbs per day. That was a lot for him. And then we have Roman Fritz throwing in 2.5 to 3 kilograms of carbs per day. Those are also prominent examples of what I'm trying to describe, that this is individual. But that's it in terms of water and salt standardization, in terms of training intensity reduction, in terms of activity reduction. I think last topic then for today is for sure then in the peak, it's also diuretics. If I use anything, it's a diazide and nothing else. I don't think I think it's the most calculable, and I think it also does a proper job without being too aggressive and
most predictable.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. And it's usually for me, that's really then 1 day out. So I'm also not someone to throw in diuretics as something like 3 days out or something like that. I mean, sometimes you collect data. Sometimes you give a guy in the evening 1 day out. Saturday is the show. Friday evening, you give him a certain amount of diuretics. You have him starting at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. And you see the 6 p.m. look has improved a lot. So I might go with, okay, let's not go with 1 day out evening time. Let's go with 1 day out afternoon time for the first serving. These small adjustments might happen, but I have seen so much bullshit. 2 weeks of aldactone, 200 mg of aldactone per day. In peak week, I've seen stuff with diazide and torozamide in exchange. 1 day this, 1 day this, 1 day this. So I think if you are really ready, if you are really stage ready, then it should be rather low. And it's, in the best case, as you mentioned, nothing. I had 1 or 2 guys that were fucking ready and they just said, I need it for my head. And then I really tried to split it into an eighth of a diazide. Just to give them something for their head, but with a minimal effect. But I think there is just athletes that will generally benefit from moderate and low diuretics usage. I don't go with the John Jewett statement of saying in the perfect it's not needed at all for anyone. I think that's too extreme, but I think there is way more athletes than they themselves think that could do great without diuretics. I will absolutely propose that statement.
Yeah, great. So the last question for today is for those who are maybe wanted to hire you, but they are afraid that you are not going to allow them to eat anything after the show. So what is your the approach after the show that says that we have next shows within 2 weeks after this one, and I'm stepping out of the stage, and coach, can I eat something?
I would say, there's one case where I'll say no, and that's back-to-back shows. So if it's 7 days out, then it's just not possible. Then I would rather have, if it's something important for you, I would rather choose 2 weeks between shows before we plan the season. If it's 2 weeks in between, I would say within reason, I have no issue at all. So many times I'm also at the competition, and then we all go to eat together. And usually if it's something like, In the evening after the show, most athletes won't have eaten a ton throughout the contest day anyway. So usually, for example, if it's then in the evening, going to the restaurant, and you can be free. You can also have 3 courses. You can have starter, main, and dessert. I'm completely fine with that. But please not, after these 3 servings, going to McDonald's and then hitting another 5,000 calories back. So I would say with a healthy human behavior, I'm completely fine with someone having dinner at the show evening and also then an open and free breakfast or brunch the day after. That's usually what I tell them. Open dinner evening, free breakfast afterwards, and then the day after the show is just free breakfast and your regular prep day on top. So that's usually how I do it. Always exceptions, but generally I think it's pretty much true.
Great. So thank you, Fabian, for today and for your time. And if there's something that you want to, I don't know, promote, or you just want to just tell something at the end, it's your time now.
No, so I have to thank you for your time. It's always refreshing for me to ensure that my English is still on a proper level, and I hope everyone could get it well with my German accent. No, other than that, if anyone is interested, of course, I offer coaching for contest prep and for lifestyle clients. So you can find me Instagram FH91_coaching. Same goes on YouTube. I think we will collab anyway. So for YouTube, you can find me down here. You can find me on Instagram.
All links are gonna be in the description down below. Yeah.
Perfect. So then you guys can find me. If you're still listening to here, I mean, we are at 1 hour 40 minutes. So then also thank you to each viewer for taking the time for staying here until the end. In an era of short form content, I think it's a major appreciation if someone stays until the end.
Yeah, if someone sticks to the end of this podcast with us, just text in a comment down below Fabian and the emoji of the heart.
That's perfect. Let's do it.
Okay, thank you so much once again. And for those who are still with us, please subscribe, share, and comment if you can. Thank you, and see you guys in the next one.
Thank you.